So hello, today I'm at St Giles's Church in Mountnessing in Essex, and I'd like to talk to you about the history of the church and the village. So Mountnessing is a village in Essex. It's 2 miles from Ingatestone and 3 miles from Brentwood. The old Roman road from London to Colchester passes directly through Mountnessing, which is directly in front of us. And the village is surrounded by farmland with small country lanes connecting nearby villages. The elevation here is 70 metres and the population is about 1,380. Just 2 miles away, 3 sarsen stones stand in nearby Ingatestone. Now these stones were left from the last great ice age of 11,700 years ago. And from Mountnessing, the wall of ice would have been clearly visible. So just think that woolly mammoths and saber-toothed tigers would have roamed here. Now when Emperor Claudius crossed the Thames in AD 43, his 20,000 legionnaires and several war elephants would have marched through the village where we are today, and they would have passed by this very crossroad. Now the main road is still called Roman Road, which is in front of us. And St Giles's Church contains building material from the Roman structure, possibly a villa at the time. Now during the Saxon period, a fairly large settlement existed here flanking this road. We're about 1.5 miles from St Giles. So we know that in 1066, Ingvar of Bursted, Alfhied and Algar were the lords of the manors here, and by 1086 Ranulf, brother of Elgar, was the powerful tenant-in-chief of both manors, which is most unusual. William of Bowes and again Ranulf was acting as the lords here. Now the population was fairly large. There were 48 households, including 8 slaves, 11 plough teams and 760 pigs, which is the highest number of pigs I've come across in the whole of Essex. There was also 160 sheep. So today the manor is known as Cowbridge, and I live not far from there myself. The Mountnessing gets its unusual name from the Mountnessing family, who came over with William the Conqueror in 1066. And they were from Normandy in France, and the name originates from the Gallo-Roman name Montanus. Now the Ing part of Mountnessing means meadow in Saxon, so you can imagine this would be quite a pleasant area. Now the Mountnessing family held the manor here from the time of King Stephen of 1134 and would hold it until 1525 when Henry VIII carried out the dissolution of the monasteries. Now an interesting family that came into view from these years of 1141 to 1151, also in the time of King Stephen, was the Capra family. And they would appropriate a place called Toby Priory, which is only half a mile from where I'm standing. Now William de Capra, his wife Rosetta and son William would dedicate the priory to the Virgin Mary and St Leonard. And the priory was run by a man called Tobias, so you can see where Toby Priory gets its name. And there would be many monks living there. They were from the order of the Augustines, and it even had its own small church. Today only one small wall remains. Now in the grounds of the priory, the Victorians dug the garden. There was a mound and they discovered 6 oak coffins, and they were hewn out of solid oak. They were perfectly preserved, and each lid was held down by 4 oak pegs. Not far from this was another ancient grave was exhumed, but this one contained the lower part of a Knights Templar, complete with his armour, and he had a lion's insignia. The Mountney family owned the manor during the Crusades, and the De Capra family would be the patrons of Toby Priory. Now, during the 12th century, in the reign of Edward II of 1307, a document was written with a wax seal, and it stated Sigillium Sancti Leonardo or Leonardi di Toby, which translates to Seal of St Leonard of Toby. Now today, in view of the main crossroads at Mountnessing where we've just been, stands this fine old windmill, or I think it's called a post mill. It was built in 1807. A mill was recorded first here in 1477, so we can assume that the old Roman road would have been, as it was today, a very important transport route. Now if you would like to visit this fully working mill, it is open every third Sunday in the summer months during 2 and 5 p.m, but you will need to check the notices here. Now I did read that in a church in Rutland a stone slab reads Endymion was the captain of the horse for Charles I and Stuart. Now Endymion died in 1683 after the English Civil War, and Endymion left much money to the poor in many places, including Mountnessing. Now the village here was then called Mountnessing, and he left 6 acres and £50, which was a large sum indeed. Perhaps he left some of these fine fields that we see today. Now Mountnessing village has 3 pubs: the Georgian Dragon, which is in front of us, the Plough and the Prince of Wales. Now in 1774 the customs men stormed the Georgian Dragon looking for a gang of smugglers that were known to frequent here, and shots were exchanged and flintlocks were used. Today it's a fine old pub. Now if we go back to 1930, now Mountnessing had a motorcycle scramble track here, and I believe it was behind this very pub. And what they'd done, the owner had bought 6 open top buses and they were set up as grandstands, and it would cost 6p each to get a ticket to watch. A year later there was a greyhound track which was also set up here, and by 1932 it had all gone. Now in World War II the village here was hit really hard. In 1945 a V2 rocket crashed into a field close to where I'm standing, and the blast damaged half the properties here. The Congregational Hall, or the chapel, had completely collapsed, and a school bus had left thankfully 3 minutes before from, I believe, this bus stop. The V2 landed close to where the Brentwood to Chelmsford buses would stop. Now in 1951 the Mountnessing Cricket Club was formed originally from the Blackmore Club, who had been in existence for 50 years, and then in 2020 and that dreaded COVID period the club returned to Blackmore. The fine pitch here is still used as a second. Now I've also found out that Mr. George Walker, who also liked his cricket, for George lived near the old Georgian Dragon pub, and at the grand old age of 92 he had to give up picking apples from his trees off his ladder. He had an orchard. He had electricity installed, so we could watch the cricket. Now, going back to Mountnessing's mill, sacks of flour would be loaded onto horse-drawn wagons and delivered a short way across the junction, right here to where we stand, to the Prince of Wales pub. Back then the old pub was the village bakery, and it would be for several hundred years. And the ovens are still in the back. Now, the third pub here in Mountnessing is the Plough, and you can see that it's not too far from the Prince of Wales. I don't have any history on it. Now we've moved 1.5 miles away and we're back where the church is. So now we're at Mountnessing Hall. This is a late 16th century building with 18th and 19th century additions. It's highly likely that it was built on the site of the Norman manor of the Mountnessing family. And part of the Norman moat survive today. So it's quite possible that the Saxon manor was here before that. Now we're standing at the pond which is opposite St Giles's church, and it's likely to have been part of the original Saxon moat. And in more recent centuries it could well have been used for passing wagon trains and horses and cattle. So if you look just there, there's a small road, and that road connects up to Billericay. So now moving on to St Giles's church itself. Now St Giles himself is the patron saint of cripples and beggars, and he lived as a hermit in France during the 7th century. He lived and foraged from his surroundings, and he was actually shot by an arrow protecting his pet deer. Now Giles was born in Athens in Greece in 650 AD, and when Giles became a hermit, the Frankish king Wamba held him in high esteem for his humility and refusing honours. The king built him St Giles de Gord, which was a monastery, and he became abbot there, and then he died in 710 AD. Now, interestingly for Mountnessing, the first crusade was formed under Pope Urban II and was called the Army of Raymond of St Giles. And I'm just wondering if there is any connection to the Knights Templar of Toby Priory and the Mountney family and the De Capra families of old. So moving on to the actual church itself for St Giles, it's built from mixed rubble and limestone dressings with some Roman brick on the other side. And we shall start with, we'll start with the memorial from World War II. Which looks like it's made of granite, and it lists all the men that made the ultimate sacrifice. Now what we're looking at here is actually the nave, and this is the west end wall. It's built in brick, and above it you can see at the top a small gable. And this has got a moulded sill, and below it's dated 1653. And you can see the buttresses here and the shadows that are cast now the sun's caught it. So if we zoom up onto the gable at the top, now if you look, you can see a series of S brackets. Now these brackets are bolted directly into the impressive oak belfry structure which is inside. Now I'm actually painting this in watercolour and it's quite a challenging structure to paint, but it's really nice to look at actually. So now we're coming round to the south porch. Now this south porch looks fairly old, but actually it's from 1913. It's just 1 year before World War One began. Now this porch replaces a much earlier porch, which was from 1888. Now 1888 is the same year in which Jack the Ripper of Whitechapel, London carried out his heinous crimes. So I'm guessing there would have been a porch before that. So whether some of these timbers are actually from the original porch is hard to say, but they certainly look nice. And as we enter the inside, now the Victorians remodelled this church quite heavily, and this south aisle here, you can see they've worked a lot on this, I guess reusing existing materials. And this will be the same with this door and the stone jambs. But we can go inside, and I've got a lovely key here. So first of all, get my cap off. And look at that key. Isn't that a beauty? And we shall enter. And what we should do is just have a quick look at the view. Okay, so now we're in the church. We're in the south aisle. Now the south aisle is 9.5 feet wide, and it's 13th century construction. Was heavily reconstructed within the Victorian period. Now what you notice here as you come in is this lovely font. Now this is 15th century, or at least the actual stonework is, and it's an early English font. It originally came from Hutton Parish Church in 1873, and it would have been opposite the south door originally. If you look at the carvings on here, we've got on the east side, we've got ears of wheat, and if we look on the northeast, this is acorns and leaves. And if we look on here, we've got a square, like a builder's square here. And if you look, you've got like compass or dividers. Now this one here is Northwest's 5 petalled rosettes, a type of flower. And let me just turn the page. So on the west side we've got what's called Patty Cross, and this is associated with Christian crowns, and this cross is often associated with the Teutonic Knights from the Crusades. So quite interesting that. Now on the southwest we have a fleuret, which is of French origin from Normandy. And if we make our way around to the south side, we've got a sort of weathered or damaged Patty Cross again, Teutonic Knights. And if we go around to this side, which is the southeast, we've got 4 flowers. Now if we look at the cover, the font cover, it's 9 feet tall, and the cone, it terminates by on the top is a figure of Virgin Mary and Child, which is right at the top there. And we can have a look inside. It's all made in oak, so it can be opened up. And in the centre there you've got IHS, which stands for Jesus in Latin. And then a more recent lead insert. So you can see a lot of work, as usual, has been put into this. So I'll just close this up. There. Now if we go round to the front, now if you look there, there's some wording there which is in Latin, and it reads Ultrana farun sanctis suis in gloria num prari, which means eternal far to the saints to whom glory will pair, or more or less. Now then, if you look over here, this is what they call a portable font, and you've got the same emblem on the front. And now we should go around to the nave. Now I've not put the lights on because I kind of like the way that the camera's capturing everything. Seems to be capturing it quite well. You're met with this list of vicars, priests, and the first one is the incredible age of 1151, which is connected to the Toby Priory. And the last one on here is 1969, but there's a second board over there. Now where we're standing now, this is the nave, and it's 40 feet by 21. It was originally built in the year 1141. And if we have a look over here, there's 3 arcades, which are these arches and capitals. And on the central one, which I shall move around here, this is from the mid-13th century, and it's, I believe, a Norman head, although I've been told sometimes the masons would actually carve what they depicted as their foreman. So whether they've been kind or cruel, I don't know. But it looks like he's consuming foliage. And if you follow it all the way round, most impressive. You'll get me saying that quite a few times in this church. And I reckon the same masons have been working on this side here. Okay, I've moved over to another area now, and if you look at the top there, you can see the original king posts, the beams. Now we're going to look at the stoop. Now this is, let me have a little look. Yeah, you can see it from there. So originally this would have projected outwards, and it would have had a bowl in it which contained water. And the stoop was once where holy water would stand, and parishioners would dip their fingers in and make the cross sign as they walked in. It's most likely that it was broken in the Reformation, the English Reformation, or the English Civil War. It's possible that there was another doorway here, the entrance. Now if we look here, we've got the original rood stairs. You can see the steps that would go up, and you can see the very small entrance there. If you look downwards, you can see just how narrow they are and steep. Now the rood stairs were designed for the priest to gain access to the rood balcony or platform above. There would have been a rood screen that would have gone across here, separating the nave and the chancel. Now what we're going to do now, we're facing the belfry. And if I come back on a wide angle, you'll just get it all in. It's quite impressive. This is one of the finest oak belfries in England. It's built in the 15th century. It's got 4 main posts that rest on 16-inch square sole oak plate. And above, it's got curved oak braces and lattice beams. Either side, you'll see, in either aisle, there's a large oak brace. This is designed to steady the whole structure. Now the whole oak mechanism or structure is bolted from the outside on those S brackets. So if we look on here, yeah. So when I say 16-inch square, so if we're taking it from this corner and then we go straight down and disregard this skirting board type thing, and if you follow it, you can see just how impressive it is. So let's have a little look at this. You see a lot of work's gone into this. Now over the centuries it's had a lot of corrections done to it. It's obviously got some movement, some sort of structural problems now. You can see engineers are monitoring its movement now. So I guess if that plastic cracks, they know it's moving. And if you look up there, you can see the lattice beams, sort of diagonal strength. And if you look up the top, you can just see just how big it is. Now, believe it or not, of all this structure, there's only one bell, which doesn't make sense to me. Now, when building these sort of structures, it's not just a case of you could just take as much oak as you wanted from the forest. There'll be quite a lot of permission granted required from the aristocracy, I guess, and then it would come down to lordships. Right, so I've moved back as far as I can now against the west door. So my back is now against the west wall. You can still see the immense structure here. Now, it has one bell and it's by Thomas Bulliston of 1500, so it gives you an idea of when this was built. Thomas was casting bells in Aldgate, London from 1500 to 1515, and he is in fact the predecessor of the Whitechapel Bell Foundry in London, which I believe was the oldest and the longest running foundry. Now in 1500 I found the world's first English cookbook was printed, and it was called This is the Boke of Cokery. Now the bell itself is cast, and in Latin it reads Sancti Jacoba Ora Pro Nobis, which says, or stands for, Saint Jacob, pray for us. Now this brings us on to this lovely old chest over here. Now this is actually 13th century. It's one of the oldest, probably one of the oldest chests in Essex, I would guess. Incredibly old. There's a bit better. Now again, this is cast from solid, or carved out, hewn from solid oak. It's got 3 iron clasps, so you can see there. They have been cut off. I'm just wondering if this again was cut off in the time of the English Reformation, when the soldiers would have come in here and demanded to see everything. This one here looks like something's been pulled out of there a long time ago. And this one's been cut off as well. Now if you look here, there's a ring on there, and this ring is basically designed to lift the huge weight of it. It's so heavy. Now why did they put 3 clasps on it? Well, there would have been 3 individual locks with keys, 1 for the priest and 2 for the church wardens, and this would stop fraud. And if you look at the end, it's quite badly perished. Now it is possible that this could have been a coffin, because at Toby Priory there were 3 oak coffins of this sort of description from that period, so it's possible. The other thing it could have been is a crusader's chest. So there is a 12th century crusader's chest, which was in the time of Richard I in Great Bursted, and it could well be this was a similar item. You've also got a very small slot there, which would be for donations. So coins would have been popped in there, I guess, when they were raising money for various things. We've got a small tapestry from 1984, and this was made by the Mountnessing Brownie Pack, and they were marking the 70th anniversary. And beneath it is, could this be Wind in the Willows? With toad and badger and hedgehog, etc. And over here, this is, I believe, the Royal British Legion banner. Now we're in the north aisle itself. We focus on there a bit better. Yep. So it's 8.5 feet wide. It's 13th century. It's got the original windows inserted. This is the original north doorway, which would have been used for the priests, and possibly the gentry may have come through that door. There's another original window. And here are the supports for the huge belfry structure. Now these must also be 16-inch square or thereabouts, and you can see how they abut the wall, and there's probably that iron rod. It's probably one of the S plates that goes through. And if you look, you can see how the carpenters have repaired it. It's probably due to woodworm and decay. And you can see how they've attached sections with huge pins. Quite impressive. And on the wall here we've got various memorials. If you look, they're all connected to Toby Priory. There's quite a lot of Prescott family memorials here. If you look here, you can see, although these are curved, you can see they're perfectly in line with each other. So there's great skill involved. Now, we come over to this window here. Now, this window here is quite rare. You can see that they've got St Giles's kneelers there, and you've got the deer there. And this goes in with the window, which represents St Giles himself. This window is actually quite rare. It's made by Kemp. So it's called a Kemp window. Now, Charles E. Kemp was a Victorian designer and manufacturer of stained glass, and he made over 4,000 windows. And Kemp's patrons were from the royal family and the Church of England. And he studied with William Morris. And by 1899, the factory in London had employed 50 craftsmen and women. And the trademark is a golden wheat sheaf. Now, St Giles, it shows obviously St Giles himself with the deer, which he would take milk from to nourish him. Now, if you look here, you can see how the stonework disintegrates over time. You can see how they've cut in new sections over the centuries. It's a very small pulpit here. But if you look above it, what's unusual, it's got a sound board. And this basically carries the sound over to the congregation. So now we're facing the chancel, and this was rebuilt in the 18th century, replacing the original 14th century structure. Now, the original 14th century arch has been left in place, although I've got a feeling that is Victorian. It's too clean. But if you look over there, you can see something that's been blocked up from the rood screen area. And you've got some fantastic memorials. Great detail. Edmund Pert. So the Pert family is another family that has connection here. Now, the oldest brass that's in the floor here is from 1583. This is hidden under the rug, so 17th December 1583. I did notice it's in English, which is quite unusual because mostly it's in Latin back then. And this is for John Pearce of Arnoldy Hall of Mountnessing, and said that he was an honest man. Now, many of the benefactors of this parish left goods, and in 1681, Edmund Canning left Rye'sfield to the poor, and in 1807, it was still in use, and Amy English of 1787 left a farm called Pincheons, and the land was allowed to, the money from this went for the teaching of the poor children here in Mountnessing. Now we're looking at the old pipe organ, and this is from 1891, and somewhere around here I read that it's got a pumping handle, but I couldn't find it. So in the old days, before electricity, somebody would have to wind it up or pump it. Now, if you look up there, we've got the pictures. And you can see he's got a sort of reed or stick over his shoulder, and he's got the 10 Commandments. And if you look on the right hand side, this is Aaron, his brother. These are in fine oil. Now these are made in the same time as these altar rails, which are 1726. And I find these just exquisite. If you look, you can see how they've been worn by hundreds of years of hands. And then you can see the barley twist balusters going down. So you could just imagine that the carpenter, when he would be making these, covered in sawdust and wood shavings. Great stuff. Now up here above the high altar area, it's a beautiful window. I'm not sure if it's connected to the Kemp family or the Kemp designers. Now the last piece of antiquity I'd like to show you inside the church is this mass dial, scratch dial, which you can see there. And this is in the vestry. Now this means that this would have been on the outside of the wall. So I'm not sure if they've actually moved the doorway. So now we shall leave this lovely old church. The sun's shining outside, so we shall go out and have a look outside. I say the weather is absolutely spot on at the moment. It's 28 degrees. It's been like that for about 2 or 3 days. A lovely clunk. I'm just trying to get to figure out this phone. So you can see that there's a Millennium chair. Now if you look in the distance, there's a small gate, and what you find, especially in England, is there's lots of public footpaths. These public footpaths are set from centuries ago. They're almost protected, so the maps, the Ordnance Survey maps, they will actually list all the routes, and they've even gone online now so you can use your phone. You're smart enough to have these things. And you can see this particular footpath will go straight across this road, and you can see that sign there. But if you're coming out of this particular one, you need to be very careful, because it's basically set on a bend. With another bend up there. Now from St Giles, if I'm not mistaken, there's 5 footpaths And these footpaths will run all over the place. Some will go to Billericay, others will go to Ingatestone, others will go to Stock. So you do find there is a lot of ramblers that come through this area. Now this is the outside of the renovation, well, the new chancel, I think it was 18th century from my memory. Now this is the north aisle, and this is basically the oldest part of the church. Although it's 30, it's the materials they've used. So there's your Roman brick, huge amount there. So it's quite likely there would have been a chapel, or not a chapel, but some sort of religious building from the Romans, or perhaps a villa. And Roman brick is about 1.5 to 2 inches thick, so they're quite easy to spot. Some of these might be Roman tiles off the roof. So yeah, it's quite a lot. Again, one of the original windows. This is protected this side. And here we have the toilet block, which is more recent, obviously. I did notice they've got a lancet, or the architects made a lancet window or vent in the top. It's quite clever. These belfries, as I understand, are quite unique to Essex in a lot of ways. So Essex is quite famous for having them. And we're now making our way round to the west end again. So I'd like to mention that St Giles is very active church in the community. It carries out baptisms, weddings and funerals. And yeah, if you can get inside and have a look, please do. Hope you enjoyed that. Thank you very much.